Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing some beginner knitting tips that will make your life so much easier. Take it from someone who's made every mistake in the book. Knitting shouldn't be stressful. Thanks so much for coming along on the journey with me, and I hope you enjoy. This video is going to be organized in 3 main sections: preventing and fixing mistakes, tools and DIYs, and knitting strategy. Feel free to skip around or just watch the whole thing. I wouldn't complain. This is one of the most important things I'm going to show you in this video. When you are working in the round, whether it be with double pointed needles or circular needles like these, when you cast on and you're gonna do your first row, the most important thing is to make sure that your row is not twisted. And so basically just line up this little edge so that it's all on the same side, making sure it doesn't get twisted. And then once you have a flat edge and no twists, you start your next row. If it is twisted, say you start working it and there's a twist in it right here, then no matter what you do, it's gonna be twisted and you're gonna have to take it out. So just don't do that. What do you do when you drop a stitch? The easier method is the crochet hook method. Just find your drop stitch, put it on your hook, and then there's gonna be these little ladder pieces, and the amount is gonna depend on how many rows you actually drop the stitch. Grab the first one, bring it through your drop stitch, repeat for the next piece, and continue until you're back at the top. And then just put that back on your needle, and then you can continue knitting. What do you do if it's on the purl side? Let's just pretend we're purling, and we drop it. Here is our dropped stitch. When we have it on the knit side, it's going to be in front of the ladder pieces like this. Flip it to the knit side, and then do exactly what we just did. Continue working like nothing ever happened. The other way that you can do this is grab that stitch that you dropped and put it on your needle. Now there's going to be a couple little pieces behind, but you want to make sure you keep track of those and you catch the bottom one. Put that on the needle, and then kind of as if you're casting off but backwards, just pass the stitch over and repeat that, and there you go. The tension will even out. So say you're knitting and you realize that you made a mistake only a couple of stitches back, and you don't want to take everything off your needles and go back, and it wasn't like rows ago. Instead of taking everything off your needles, what you can do is just kind of knit backwards. This is a purl row. You can also do this with a knit stitch. What I like to do is kind of pull the working yarn and just stick my needle back in, and then continue to do that, so that way you're not dropping any stitches. You don't have to worry about having to fix a drop stitch or anything like that, and you can just work your way back to the mistake you made and fix it. Say you're really confused about a piece of the pattern, or you're just really not that confident yet and you feel like you're gonna drop stitches or you're gonna have to go back, and you know that you want to be able to come back to this point easily. What you can do is put in a lifeline. You can just take a piece of scrap yarn and put it through the loops on the needle and just leave them on. So now we have our lifeline in. All you do is just leave that and continue to knit like normal. Let me do a row so that we can take it out and I can show you what happens if you need to go back to your lifeline. I purposefully did it not in the right pattern so that it's more realistic. You're welcome, guys. You can see it right here. And let's say I'm like, oh no, I messed up. I need to go back to this row. So all you really have to do is take your needle or needles, if you're using double pointed needles, out and just undo everything. But lucky for you, all your stitches are on this loop, so all you have to do is put your needles back in and you can just start back up from where you left off. And again, be careful not to put your needle through this piece of yarn and split it, because that will make it harder to take off. Once you have all your stitches back on your needles, the only thing you have to do, this would be a lot easier if it wasn't on double pointed needles, is pull it out. You can do this needle by needle too, you don't have to do it all at once. And there you go, you're back to your starting point. Knitting a swatch is always a good idea. I know a lot of the time we're just really excited and we want to start our project and we don't want to have to spend time knitting a little square, and we're like, oh, it's probably gonna fit, oh, it's probably not that different anyway. But let me tell you, it is better to knit a swatch and to be sure than to get halfway done with your project and realize it's not gonna fit you. Always, 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 always make a swatch. And if you're feeling extra fancy, you can actually block your swatch. Block your work. It makes a big difference. So when we knit things, usually they come out a little bit stretched out. They come out a little bit uneven, and that's just because of how we've been handling them and everything. But if you block them, they'll be a lot more even. I'm going to show you the wet blocking method. Had to throw it in there. This dish towel is from my homemade dish towels video. So I made 3 dish towels and this is one of them. It's a great beginner knitting video. It's meant for someone who's never knit before, so it'll help you move your skills along. Anyway, we have our soapy water. I'm going to take my swatch, and you can do this with any piece of knitwear, and just soak it, and we'll come back in 15 minutes. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes. I'm just going to gently squeeze out my swatch. Just lay this flat, but before I do that, I'm going to arrange it into the shape that I want it to be when it's dry. Now we just wait for it to dry. Here is our blocked swatch. Stitches are a lot more even. There's a lot of alternatives you can use rather than having to buy stitch markers that are specifically meant for knitting. You can use any kind of ring for a stitch marker that is going to just be used while you're working in the round. You can use earrings, you can use rings, you can use anything that is basically a closed loop. Also, for removable stitch markers, you can use safety pins or anything that you will be able to take on and off. You can also use earrings, those kind of hoops that you can open and close. If you don't have any of those things, but you have yarn, you can even just use a piece of scrap yarn. Ideally, when you're doing this, you want to use a different color than what you're actually knitting with. Making a stitch marker with yarn is very simple. All you really have to do is just cut a piece of scrap yarn, make a loop. It just really has to be big enough so that it fits over whatever needle you're using. Tie a knot and cut the ends shorter. So now you have a stitch marker, and you can do this with as many as you need. There are also things specifically designated to holding stitches while you're working on different parts of a project, but you don't actually need any of that. You can just take a piece of scrap yarn on a yarn needle. Say I wanted to put this piece of my sleeve on hold. What I could just do is take all of the stitches onto my scrap yarn from my needle. I just like to push them down as I go so I don't lose any stitches. Now all of our stitches are on hold. I like to just tie a little knot, well, really more of a bow, so that none of our stitches come loose. And there you go, a homemade stitch holder. Then when you need your stitches back on your needle again, all you do is just put your needle through. I like to do it while the yarn is still through the loops, just so we don't lose any. This is important. While you're picking up the loops, try not to stick your needle through the actual piece of scrap yarn, because that will make it a lot harder to get your stitches back on the needle. And then remove the scrap yarn. And now remove it. Now I don't know about you, I love using center pulls. I just find it less messy and just easier all around. But the issue is that sometimes it can be a mess to try and find the center pull. My first piece of advice is, if you feel like there's tension when you're trying to pull it out, don't. You're gonna probably make a huge mess and make a knot. Sometimes you can pull a little bit, like just pull like the center out, and you will eventually get to the end. But I have seen, and I do find, that this does help. If you kind of give it a good tap, sometimes it helps loosen up the free end, and you can find it a little bit easier, like that. Center pull. One thing that's very helpful when you're reading a pattern is to print your pattern out, and the reason being, you can highlight it, you can write on it, you can do circles, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to read through, for example, this whole paragraph. You can just look for exactly the number that you need, the number of stitches or whatever it is that you're looking for. There are different knitting styles, namely the continental and the English style. I knit continental, but I do also know how to knit English. While I do think it's important to find your personal style and figure out which one is easier and faster for you, and that's the one you're going to use more often, I do think that it's also beneficial to learn the other method, because if you're starting to get joint pain, you can switch the style of knitting that you're doing, and hopefully that will alleviate some of the pain. The other reason is if you're doing color work, you can actually have 2 strands of yarn and you can knit both ways, and it'll be a lot faster than having to pick up 2 pieces of yarn and switch. I love using stitch markers not only in the round to keep track of whatever section you're doing where you transfer from one needle to another, but also I love using removable stitch markers so that I can keep track of things like increases. You can see that I've used a lot of stitch markers, and that's to keep count of the amount of increases that I've done. And that's very helpful because you don't want to have to be going back and second guessing and doing things wrong, so just keeping track of things is always a good practice. This is really important, and this I also went over a lot in my knitting basics video. If you want more detail about that, then go check out that video. The general overview for absolute beginners: purl stitches have these little loops and bumps, and then knit stitches are these little V's. So keeping track of your stitches and being able to tell which stitch you just did is really important for identifying mistakes, but also transitioning between segments. You won't need to use as many stitch markers. Another little bonus tip I have is always, if you feel like you're not gonna like something, always just go back when you realize it, instead of getting halfway done, doing another 8 hours of work, and then realizing you can't live with it and you really need to fix it, and then having to undo double the amount of work. Just undo it. Don't waste more time. I've done this so many times. Just undo it. Trust me. Try things on as you go. This is unfinished, as you can see. That way, if it doesn't fit, you know, and you can go back, take it apart sooner rather than later. These beginner tips saved me hours and a little bit of money. If you want more knitting advice, or if you just like making things from scratch like me, definitely come back. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for watching.